Oh, hello. If you can believe it, I'm going to be talking about a JRPG today. I know, shocking. Have you heard of game arts? Well, I hope you have, but if you haven't, I'm going to spend some time gushing about them anyway, so it's all good. I don't think game arts is really a thing anymore, or if they are, they're definitely not what they used to be, but they have a really storied history. Founded in 1985, game arts has been around for a long time. I've even played one of their earlier games, Faria, back on the NES. I remember the game being blazingly hard, but I had an underdeveloped child brain at the time, so it's hard to say. I tried it again, it is really hard, and it's not very fun, but, you know, they tried, and look at this guy. Yeah, goatee. Game Arts would go on to make the Lunar series, what I would say is one of the more underappreciated 32-bit era game series. And those games are wonderful, truly a delight, with some very, unique translations from Working Designs. I know Working Designs gets a lot of flack for liberties taken with translations, but hey, they were bringing niche games that wouldn't have ever gotten to the US shores, so some credit is due. But not too much credit. However, Game Arts really hit something special when they released Grandia on the Sega Saturn. Grandia stood out from other games of the era with its more adventurous, refreshing sense of wonder. Similar to Lunar, but just sort of cranked up to 11. It did a very good job of setting it apart from a lot of its more dour contemporaries. I suspect is also probably inspired by the excellent Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water. If you haven't watched Nadia, check out Nadia. There's some filler episodes in there, but overall, yeah, you're welcome. But anyway, Grandia was a success, but not enough for it to come out in stupid, smelly English. Locked away as a Japan-only exclusive on the Saturn, my dirty child hands were unable to play this treasure. But then, hark! Like an angel, the clouds parted and Sony released it for me on the PS1 in the US, and my candy and grime-encrusted child fingers were finally able to touch those sacred discs. And the game was really good. It's a lot of fun. I didn't even know about the muddier textures from the Saturn port. None of that mattered to me. I was a kid and I was having a really good time with it. So what about the sequel? I picked up the Grandia HD collection some months ago so that I could revisit Grandia 1. I really had no interest in the sequel, and when I finally got around to trying it, I hated it. I think it's a combination of no nostalgia goggles to fix those graphics mixed with the protagonist's less than likable dialogue. Made for a pretty bad first impression. But then, I don't know, something clicked. And I could leave it there, but that's not really my style, and that's not much of a video, is it? So I think what I'm gonna do instead is spend the next hour or so just kinda going through the whole game. Oh, and light spoilers ahead for the first few hours. Nothing major. I'll give you a heads up when we hit the really big spoilers. Grandia 2 opens on a cutscene a little heavy on spectacle but very light on explanation. If you played JRPGs of this era, you're probably used to this. Seems like a starfish of light and a hand of darkness are doing battle? Violently? Well, actually, kind of slowly. Maybe it's a hug. But they sort of moosh into each other, and then that makes a big, large ouch on the surface of the planet, so I guess it was a fight. Scientific name for it there, by the way, an ouch. A boo-boo in layman's terms. It looks like this epic battle has become something mythological in nature. What we're going to find out through context and conversation in the first hour or so is we're seeing the foundations for this game's world. This is a battle between two gods, Valmar and Granus. A battle for the very salvation of mankind's soul if the Church of Granus has the right of it. After the cutscene, the story jumps in media res. Ryudo is a geohound, which, best I can tell, is this world's word for mercenary. And he's finishing a job involving stealing from lizards and testing the airspeed velocity of a laden bird. Ryudo's job is a necessity in a world where monsters' appearances in what used to be a normally safe space is becoming more common. The bird is Sky, it's his companion and fellow geohound. He's also the more mature of the pair and acts as a voice of reason for Ryudo. They collect from their client and head off to find a new job. Immediately, we're given the kind of idea who Ryudo is, just by his interacting with his clients and Sky. This part does a good job of telling us a little bit more about how Ryudo sees the world and, more importantly, how the world sees him. Apparently, geohounds are looked down on by the bulk of society. While some feel ambivalent toward him, no one really ever seems very excited to see a geohound. Unfortunately for everyone, geohounds are more in demand than ever, what with the monsters showing up everywhere. Seems like people are on the edge, as many of the happenings in the world are lining up with a prophecy for a day of darkness. Valmar's moon signals his devious return, you see. In fact, anytime Valmar stuff happens, that moon glows pretty ominously, so it's not exactly a subtle sign. Valmar's a straightforward guy, he's a real straight shooter. Ryudo has little concern for any of this though. His main interest is getting paid, which might explain why some folks don't like geohounds. Awkwardly, no one ever seems to have given me a good reason why they look down on geohounds specifically as much as they do. It's a shame because the rest of the game's world, as we'll explore through the story, is very thoughtful. But conversations with Sky make it seem clear he's both a little lonesome and maybe a lot more outwardly cold than he really is deep down. Sky's response to this seems to be almost unilaterally, "Go talk to a woman." The bird does everything short of telling Ryudo he needs to have sex, and it never really gets less uncomfortable. You know, like once in an Applebee's, my aunt let the waitress know I was single. Apropos of nothing, I wasn't single. I think she thought it would help me. It didn't. But if you've ever had a waitress at an Applebee's tell you they have no interest in dating you, not to your face, but instead to your aunt while you sit there in horror, then you might understand the stomach-squirming feeling of Sky telling Ryudo he needs to get laid. Thankfully, they ease up on the bird matchmaker bit pretty quick. Unlike my aunt. Design-wise, Ryudo's character feels very of the era. He's got the tightest of tight shirts so that all may admire his voluptuous muscles, and what looks like perhaps some kind of vestigial goggles on his head flap thing. He doesn't ever put the goggles down, they're just kind of there. It's designed for design's sake, which is honestly fine with me. I don't need a video game character to be the height of minimalism or anything. In fact, that would be boring. JRPGs and fashion have long been in conversation with one another, and I'm fine with vestigial goggles. Oh, and Ryudo has belts. You can't have a 2000s Dreamcast game without some extra belts on your protagonist. I think a lot of people roll their eyes at belts, and I'm betting that's probably Square Enix's insistence on slapping them on everything for a couple years there, but hey. Deep down, I kinda like the belts. All the characters in this game use really bright colors, and Ryudo is no exception. His outfit has a really nice color palette of mostly purple and blues, but his bandana creates a really nice pop of contrast as a complement to all those cooler colors. Were I to guess about the symbolic nature of all these colors, I'd say, hey, maybe he stays cool under pressure as we'll see in the story, but it could just be the purple looks nice. Ryudo's second job happens to be for the Church of Grandia, and they need us to escort their songstress for a sealing ceremony. Our contact is a pastor in the small town of Carbo. It becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly that Ryudo really hates the church. In fact, Ryudo doesn't seem to like anyone. And truly, I found Ryudo to be entirely unlikable. I think it almost killed my playthrough early on. Ryudo is a jerk to every person he meets in the game. It's tough to have someone be the hero of your story when they're just this level of annoying. Now granted, I'm a Midwesterner, a group of people sort of known to be hyper-polite about things in comparison to other regions, but very much to a fault. For example, I recently apologized to a chair for bumping into it. But Ryudo extends well beyond the pale with his snark. Even people who are nice to him end up getting treated like garbage in return. Now, we'll of course be meeting new characters as the story goes on, like you do. Ryudo's gonna be some level of asshole in response to them, so I'm gonna preface that here. He's intolerably pig-headed to almost everyone he meets, so we'll operate under the assumption that he's rude to anyone he runs into, so I don't have to make a footnote. He has a burn for everyone he speaks to, and his snarky comeback is punctuation for many of the things he says. He might be the coolest person in the world if you're a really angry 12-year-old, but he's a bit of a blockhead if you're a full-grown adult. I'll go more into this later, but it does give his character a lot of room for growth. Despite Ryudo's almost tiring cynicism to start, the story does get rolling. The songstress is named Elena, and Ryudo is tasked with escorting her through the Black Forest, which is a job pretty below his skill level. And with only a couple puny monsters in the way, we drop her off at her tower no problem. While waiting for the ceremony to finish, we hear a scream though, and Ryudo rushes in. At the top of the tower, Elena's friend explains that the ritual has failed with her dying breath. Now, not to be rude to a dying lady, but I think we kind of picked that up with the context clues. A tower swarming with monsters, a room littered with dead nuns, and a black cloud of miasma all seem like pretty bad signs. It feels sort of like wondering if you left the stove on while your house is on fire. Finding Elena, we see that the black mist is swirling around her and shadowy black wings are sprouting out of her back. Seeing this triggers something in Ryudo. He's seen something like this before. There's a past trauma here. There's no time, however, to explore the situation's similarities, as Ryudo jumps into action to save them both. He ziplines them both out of the tower before darkness begins to fully envelop it. And look, I don't want to be that guy. I suspend my disbelief with the best of them. In fact, I think I suspend disbelief better than most people. But where did this rope come from? What is it holding up? What is its purpose? Where is it when he lands? I know that the best way to die unhappy is to worry about where the proverbial plot rope comes from, but for some reason, rewatching this footage is setting my brain on fire. Anyway, where was I? Right. Having used the plot rope to avoid danger, our heroes managed to escape, having interrupted the ceremony's very likely grim ending. It looks like that miasma has fully enveloped the tower, so our only choice is to return to town. Elena goes to rest in the church while we figure out what to do next. But suddenly, the church is attacked by a figure with shadowy black wings. Uh-oh. Skimpy clothing? Doing vandalism? I'm not a doctor, but this is a villain. Wait a minute. She's actually kind of nice for a villain. Let's try that again. Skimpy clothing? Vaguely flirty? This is an amoral dark magician. She doesn't make her purpose known, she just kind of beats you up with powerful spells and then kind of says she's into you and then leaves. We'll find out her name is Millennia, but more on her later. The next morning, the church contracts Ryudo for a new job. Take Elena to the Pope to get this dark energy of Valmar that has clearly entered her body out. Ryudo agrees, but perhaps it's because he wants to help the girl more than necessarily have the money? It's tough to tell at first because he's very good at being an asshole, but Sky notices, and of course makes it weird. As we journey with Elena, we get a better idea of the kind of character she is. She's very sweet. She wants to think the best of almost everyone she meets, and she has a special talent. She, even as a songstress, is gifted with an unusually lovely and ethereal voice. She's considered by many in the town to be the best songstress they've ever had. But she's very sheltered. She's never left her small country town. She's pure, and her visual character design reflects that too. Blues, whites, lots of bright colors, just like the other characters, with that one big pop of primary and the reds there. Also, probably the sharpest forearms anyone's ever had. Of course, seeing the wider world will lead to a couple mini crises that anyone in her situation would run into. When you live in a place where most everyone is nice, how do you deal with people who are behaving genuinely badly? Sometimes in the name of the religion that you yourself champion. Sounds like we got some more character growth potential here too. She also breaks through some of the gruff exterior Ryudo has early on, which is a welcome because it's nice to see he has some redeeming qualities under the surface. This comes out in a scene where he confides to Sky that he feels regret about not being able to protect her during the ceremony, and he's worried for her after such a violent event. It's almost touching if he didn't go back to being mostly a jerk for the next dozen hours. Along this journey, Elena needs to start defending herself though. That makes her your first party member, and a decent spellcaster to boot, so now would be a good time to explain how the game's battle system works. Combat in Grandia 2 is a lot of fun. They're trying some new stuff here, and sure, while at the end of the day it's still just a turn-based battle system, there's enough fun mechanics here that it feels really fresh, even 23 years later. Now, if you've played Grandia 1, the system's core is largely the same but cleaned up, and if you haven't, it works like this. At the bottom of the screen is a timeline with indicators of everyone's place in time. The sooner a character's picture hits the command portion, the sooner they get their turn. Once you put in your command though, you need to make it to the act part of the bar. Doing a basic attack or combo goes very fast, while casting a powerful spell might go a lot slower. That on the surface isn't too extraordinary until you add in the other type of attack you can select, a critical strike. Now, a critical strike isn't the traditional critical hit from a game like Final Fantasy. This isn't lucking out and hitting hard. These are actually lower damage attacks. However, if you land a special while a character is between the command and act portions of their turn, you will be able to cancel it, sending them back in the timeline and making them have to re-input a new command. Big mean enemy casting a fireball? No problem. That means if you plan your turns well and pay close attention to what your enemies are casting, you can pretty much lock the combat down in your favor. It turns the combat into nearly a puzzle. Skills you can learn are a bit different than your standard fare too, and it creates a very open approach to building your characters. Everyone in the cast will have a set of skills that only they can learn, but magic is tied to equipping mana eggs, which I guess most games would probably call a spellbook, but mana egg sounds pretty cool. Each mana egg will have a set of spells that it unlocks for the character. Whomever you equip it to gets access to those spells. As you level the mana egg, all the spell skills are tied to the egg and not the character, so whoever you equip a mana egg to gets access to the mana egg's spells at the according level. Wind magic not working out for Ryudo? No problem. Equip the mana egg to a different character and all those levels carry over. Alternatively, on the stat end, there are skill books. These focus on adding stats like strength or agility, and you equip them to characters in the same manner as the eggs. All combined, it's a very fun, very open-ended system. I heard that later games actually shined the battle system even further at the cost of the story, but I haven't played those, so I don't really want to speak to that trade-off. My biggest complaint for the battle system is how very long a spell animation is. I mean, they luxuriate in these spell and skill animations. And while they might look nice the first time, and they definitely looked cool in their era, the AoE moves are so essential to clearing out groups of enemies, you're going to be forced to watch them a lot. Look at this. This is a poison spell. Why are we being warped to the jungle? Just show me some green bubbles. Granted, the combat is all very fun, so at its core, I'm able to look past some of the egregious times for spells, but whew, they can be a lot. So now our job is to take Elena to get help from the Pope Zera. He resides in St. Heim Papal State, but along the way we're going to run into hijinks, of course. The story would be dreadfully boring if it was a straight line to the end goal. As we travel through the opening acts, we run into towns and cities in trouble, and we'll find out pretty soon that the through line to most of this trouble is the seals of the dark god Valmar. The other thing we'll run into is more members of our cast. One thing you might notice if you aren't familiar with the Grandia series is that the game has a revolving door for the characters. You won't ever have more than 4 in your party at a time. Now this isn't a wholly new idea. We've been seeing this as far back as Final Fantasy II, best I know. And while I appreciate building my party of chosen champions that I've hammered into shape on the forge of level grinding, letting the story dictate who is and isn't in my party is nice as well. It also gets rid of a very obvious question. If there's 8 of us on an adventure, why are only 3 to 4 of us fighting enemies at a time? The first 2 members of the cast you'll meet are Roan and Merrick. Now, I have this new theory that JRPGs in the late 90s and early 2000s got a tax break for including a child soldier in the cast. Roan is a 13-year-old child on a quest with you. Sure, it's a marked improvement if you've played Grandia 1 where they send an 8-year-old into battle, but can they finish middle school before they go on the adventure, at least? That aside, I think Roan is playing the foil to Ryudo's cynicism. We meet him as he journeys along with a group of traveling minstrels. This group has just been run out by monsters that attacked a town, and in the confusion, Roan loses his mother's precious amulet. Our party agrees to help him, and I must say he's got some good utility for a baby who shouldn't be fighting to the death with monsters. His dagger weapon allows him to attack quickly, which can make him a bit of a cancel machine. He's small and light, so he has some value to offer in battles that way. It's a good example of mechanical storytelling. His legendary esoteric attack gave me a good laugh, although I'm not sure if it was intended to be funny. I think it was, especially compared to the epic moves that other cast members get for their legendary attacks. His design is interesting enough. He's a little on the simple side though. He's a little kid. Same as the rest of the cast, he's draped out in bright, simple colors with a pop of red for his primary. He's wearing an axe on his back, but he fights with a knife, so you figure that one out. The main thing he offers to the party in terms of value is this incredible intelligence. He's well-read, analytical, able to remain calm in dire situations, and thinks of others first with his decision-making. All very noble qualities. Shortly after Roan, we meet Merrig. And Merrig, well, he's got some interesting energy.
What is the meaning of this? Why do you attack me?
Your smell called me. The same smell as that of the villain who destroyed my village.
Merrig is a beast man, both literally and figuratively. He's a member of the beast tribe, hence, I guess, these sounds.
I see. Your smell does not have the dank smell of death.
He's also just an HP and damage machine. He's on a quest to kill Melphis, who we discover is Ryudo's estranged brother. Ryudo's pretty shy with the Melphis details for the first part of the game, but we get the sense that he's very bad and very powerful. The initial meeting with Merrig isn't on the best terms because he mistakes Ryudo's scent for his brother's. But once we clear up the mistake, we find Merrig is actually an incredibly profound and interesting character. He'll drop little platitude-like nuggets of wisdom even on NPCs he runs into. He's calm and collected, with everything except for Melphis, it seems. He acts as the dad of sorts for the party, often finding the root of any petty conflicts and quickly resolving them. He's well-traveled and has a large amount of emotional understanding. Being from a faraway land, he also makes a good counterpoint to the rest of the cast, culture-wise. His design is also very bright, but even comparatively to the rest of the cast, there's very few cool colors on him, probably to accentuate his status as a cultural outsider. He stands a good foot taller than most of the cast and is covered in what looks to be the scars. No doubt a bit of visual storytelling and a reminder that he is the greatest warrior in his tribe. Despite his snorting entrance, Merrig was quick to become one of my favorites, and I think that's thanks to them avoiding the barbarian brute stereotype that someone with his physique might normally have. He also grunts in ways that are very upsetting on the battlefield. You get used to it. The composer, Noriyuki Iwadare, is, to say it lightly, a very productive fellow. Now, it's a bit difficult to talk about this game since Grandia 1 has a very solid sense of identity, and in many ways the music of Grandia 2 builds on this thematically. We even get a little leitmotif snuck in from Grandia 1 in tracks like The Mythical World. Some songs are just referenced wholesale, like the Inn/Mealtime song, with its lightly plucked staccato strings nearly reminiscent of a Dragon Quest game. Dragon Quest has a very classically informed soundtrack, and it's no wonder we see some of that very same classicism in Grandia 2. In a 2002 interview, Iwadare cites Debussy, Ravel, and Mahler as influences, so he certainly has got his chops to be sure. However, while Dragon Quest tends to go further and further down the road of more Baroque classical music for all of its pieces, Grandia kicks in the door and brings on the funk. I would get ambushed on purpose sometimes just to hear this straight out of the 80s keyboard riff. It sounds like a Lost Prince intro. A song's pretty good if I'm letting the enemy get the jump on me just to hear it. Some of the tracks are a little more avant-garde. For example, why are we sampling a clock in this song? Is time of the essence? It's a turn-based RPG, so I assume it's just a textural element, but I didn't really find it worked for me. And while we got a little sampler happy in a couple spots, for the most part, this is an amazing soundtrack. It goes from synthy funk to classical strings with reckless abandon, and then every once in a while just kinda dips into hair metal. It's unfortunate then that I really did not like the rest of the sound design. Now, I played the Switch remaster of this game and the balance and quality of some of the sound mixing is abysmal. I suspect for this edition they didn't re-record or master anything and it's really rough in some spots. I've even heard audio pops in some of their mixes. Sometimes your footsteps don't sound exactly appropriate to the surface that your characters are walking on, which can be a little jarring. The biggest offender by far is the UI sounds and extra sound effects. They are so loud in the mix and they can just be absolutely aggressive, like ear dagger level.
I pray that we shall be safe ahead.
Is this exclusive to the Switch version? I don't know. Maybe the Dreamcast version doesn't have this issue. Whatever the case, it is a mild disappointment given how good the rest of the soundtrack and voice cast is. But we'll get into voice cast a little later. That's hiding away in the spoiler zone. I mentioned earlier that the world in Grandia 2 is thoughtful, and it all comes down to its excellent world building. I personally attribute the game being so good about this to two things. The first is obviously creating an interesting world with unique locations. This is all accentuated by the game's use of bright, vivid colors within its locales. The presentation is so much different from other games of its time that it really helps set it apart. With the exception of the camera, it's at a weird high angle and some spots make it so you can't get a good angle and it makes it a little harder to enjoy. But high angle aside, the locations in Grandia 2 are really something special. All the cities in the game are varied and each have a sense of their own history. Mimuru is built on what used to be an expansive ocean, but when the Battle of Dark and Light happened, the granite cliffs pulled all that ocean away, meaning they're using the things they found around the area to help build their home. The brickwork is littered with old pieces of coral. The townsfolk talk about it. League City is the site where the Skyway, a massive tram to cross the Granite Cliffs, is housed. Since engineers and the like showed up to work on it, people ended up moving there to be nearer to their career. You can see where they used what was extra from construction to build infrastructure. Streets are built with scrap metal, signs of the city's industry are everywhere. That's just a few examples of the cities, and the dungeons themselves are just as varied. You looking for steamy jungles, open plains, a circulatory system, the human subconscious, a decrepit factory? It seems like Game Arts just really didn't erase anything from the whiteboard when they were originally planning these dungeons. Aesthetically, despite having all these different places, the game feels very coherent. Sometimes you'll be walking through the woods and then just run flush up to the Granite Cliffs and see something like this. I don't know about you, but that's the sort of alien yet familiar design aesthetic I live for. Part of what makes the adventure work so well is these strange, interesting locales, but what pushes them even further into feeling fully alive is the history, the mythology, which brings us to the second thing I think the game excels at. Now, a sense of history isn't the easiest thing in the world to convey. When I think of games that do it well, Dark Souls or Outer Wilds probably spring to my mind most immediately. Not to say there isn't a whole host of other games that would fit the bill nicely, but a through line with both of those games is keeping the things that founded their world vague and mystical enough that you can feel like an archaeologist piecing together some forgotten culture. When people don't understand something, they turn to the fantastical to explain it, but there's usually a grain of truth in there somewhere. Grandia 2 isn't as immersive as the aforementioned games, but one thing really sets the series apart from other turn-based RPGs. Eating food. Right, so if you haven't played a Grandia game, you might be wondering what I'm on about, and if you have, then maybe you're nodding along with me here. Most games don't have a lot of love for stopping to smell the roses, so to speak, when it comes to things that might slow our story down. If you have to hear the history of every building you visit, you run the risk of the adventure kind of turning into a school trip. Finding moments to stop and allow for this is tough, though. In terms of pacing, too much time explaining anything will kill your story. So it's very clever how Grandia 2 solves this. You go eat. Not only does having dinner with your friends at the end of the chapter add to the immense hobnobbery, the chumability, the very mingleitude of your whole party, it also is a very clever way to sneak in some stellar world building. Mechanically, eating a meal is a choice you can make at the end. It is separate from both saving and healing, and it's almost never a required action. But a lot of the game's charm lies hidden here. As an example, not very long after finding a way to board the Skyway in order to cross the Granite Cliffs, you can sit down for a meal and rest before you depart. During the meal, everyone seems to agree that the Skyway seems, on paper, like a pretty dangerous trip. There is an infinite abyss below. Merrick points out that he's heard legend of lost, wandering spirits that are consumed in the Granite Cliffs depths. Ryudo is quick to piggyback this by saying you can hear the screams of the souls at the bottom if you listen closely. This, of course, is to scare Elena, which it does. Mission accomplished. Oh, Ryudo, you scamp. Roan is quick to point out, though, that since the depth is huge, the wind actually is passing through the basin of the cliffs, and those are the sounds of the winds cutting through the cliffs below, sounding almost like a scream. Both the setting and the tenor of this conversation are great. They inject some lightheartedness into the adventure, build characters, and show you cultural myths about the world and where you are at that very moment. It's a very natural way to inject a sense of history and place to wherever you are. I love nearly everything about these interactions, so I sought them out whenever possible. It reminds me a little of the skits in a Tales game. They make a great way to learn more about where you are and how the party is feeling. If they sound boring, no problem. You can skip them or end the meal whenever you like if you're not feeling doing a whole conversation. In fact, I'd be inclined to say the only issue with the mealtime for me is that you can't quite be sure it's done until people start repeating themselves. Hearing someone say the same sentence 3 times isn't exactly the organic conclusion to a conversation I was hoping for. Now, there's more characters and locations, but I'm afraid those are over there. Yeah, that's Spoiler Town over there, stranger. A horrible and terrible place. The rest of the cast and locations are hidden in there, through that door. A place where spoilers run amok. I can't guarantee your safety for major story spoilers in there, so I need you to know that before continuing. I heard they don't even have cookies in Spoiler Town. I don't know if that's true, that's a rumor I heard. If major spoilers aren't the type you consort with, I suggest you skip ahead to the chapter labeled as spoiler-free or the timestamp here on the screen. Oh no, here comes the spoiler gatekeeper, which is also me, and I don't feel like doing a voice for this bit. Okay, fine, I'll do a voice.
Oh, I'm afraid I'm gonna need to see your badge to make sure you're allowed in this section. What a lovely design badge. Well, it all checks out, and you're allowed into Spoiler Town. Please, enjoy your stay out. People keep asking, so I might as well tell you, there's no cookies in Spoiler Town.
Oh, well, he seemed cool. Right, so out the gate there's two things. One, I'm going to go ahead and get this out of the way now. Millennia and Elena are the same person. Sorta. I mean, they're each very different in behavior, but they share the same body. Now, most of you who played the game probably caught wind of this pretty quick. I was debating even making it a spoiler. They look nothing alike, sure, but they have the same black wings, they're never in the same scene together, and they both have a crush on Ryudo. The evidence mounts up pretty quick, and the game doesn't try and hide it for very long either. When the ceremony in the tower failed, the wings of Valmar entered Elena's body, and those wings are actually expressing themselves as a physical form of Millennia. So anytime Millennia is asleep or knocked out or just feeling a moment of too high stress to really be in control, Millennia can actually take over her body. And the other thing is, we do have cookies. I lied. Look, I don't want people coming in here for these freshly baked, delicious cookies. This is only for people who are serious business about spoilers. Now, I want to circle back on both Millennia and Elena having a crush on Ryudo but sharing a body. At first, I thought Millennia acted as an id of sorts for Elena, that Millennia didn't really have genuine feelings of any real nature for Ryudo, but as the story goes on, it seems like they both have a valid reason to like him. The love story is a major part of the tale, so there's lots of moments where it plays very naturally to the narrative. So we have a love triangle, but two sides share a body, so it's more of a love Venn diagram? No, it's not that. It's a love straight line, but there's an extra dot. It's a love shape. Both of them very much like Ryudo, and both have pretty solid reasons why they're hesitant to be interested in him romantically as the story goes on. Firstly, Elena might, and I'm not sure if the game explains this or I kind of just imagined it in, but she might have taken a vow of celibacy. It's not explicitly said, but I feel like it's kind of made implicit, or at the very least doesn't feel comfortable being romantically into someone given her status as a representative of the church. It's unclear, but she definitely is not comfortable with the idea of having any feeling for Ryudo. Millennia is the spawn of an ancient evil that, if released, will surely spell the end of times for humanity, so the conflict of interest there should be a little clearer. Both have a hard time coming to terms with their feelings and expressing them outwardly toward Ryudo. But I think it's shocking to her when she realizes she's not just flirting as a power thing, he actually means a lot to her. Elena slowly grows closer to Ryudo as the story goes on. As the events that shaped Ryudo's behavior become a little more clear, Elena and he work through them together. Millennia doesn't have as much screen time with him, so some of her reasoning is a little less explained, but she's also 100% more honest with her feelings, so I don't feel like there was a lot of misdevelopment with her. Sometimes, oddly, she also seems to be rooting for Elena to tell Ryudo how she feels. Look, Millennia's a complicated lady. As for Ryudo's reaction to all this, he's seemingly pretty torn about which one he likes the most. But who will he pick? Ryudo! Ryudo, pick Millennia! Ryudo! The romance in Grandia 2 feels vital to the story. I would say this acts not only as a reason to have some feel-good lovey-dovey stuff, but it's also important in how we explore Ryudo's backstory. As he grows closer to his companions, Ryudo and Sky, in kind of a gossip-adjacent way, open up to Elena and Millennia about his darker past. A lot of Ryudo's rude behavior is an attempt to push people away, so as we get closer to facing his trauma, he's allowed opportunities to deepen his capacity for empathy. And what was that past, you ask? Well, we'll get there very shortly, but real quick, in order to put this into perspective, we're going to need to learn a little bit more about what Valmar does to a person. Unlike Elena, most who find a piece of Valmar aren't so lucky. Valmar instead seems to break your psyche and manifest as the worst parts of yourself. So if you were gluttonous, you're going to be extra gluttonous now. This seems a little unfair because the people who bump into these seals don't really have a choice, and they seem shockingly easy to open, because once Valmar merges your power with his, you get real ugly. This game employs body horror for its major antagonists, like Cronenberg-level body horror. If you've seen that one scene in Akira, you know the one, or 1982's The Thing, you have a pretty good baseline of what a piece of Valmar can do to a person. Body horror is a good fit for internal grotesqueness. Unlike other subgenres that dip into yucky horror like slashers where the blood and guts are usually the result of violence, a lot of good body horror media uses their icky stuff less as a consequence of violence toward a person, and more to represent the inner grotesque behavior of people. To put it more simply, hate, greed, envy, etc., given corporeal form, would probably look extra yucky. As the journey continues, we'll run into the parts of Valmar, the eyes, the heart, the claw, etc., and each time we see these parts, we'll see how Valmar distorts the worst traits of the person and brings them out. This, of course, is with an exception to Elena and Millennium. As a result of Ryudo's rescue, Millennia's incomplete, so she's kinda got a timeshare deal on Elena's body. Turns out if you don't let it finish the process, it sorta just does this. I guess the lesson is if you're gonna get Valmar, maybe just take the partial package. I'm glad this is a 6th generation game, or else some of these bosses actually might be some real nightmare fuel. As it stands, they're gross, but kinda smooth in a way that doesn't let my imagination go too wild. One major point to note is that anytime we defeat a piece of Valmar, Millennia vacuums it up. She's very tight-lipped about the why of it all, but it's safe to assume, since they all want to absorb one another, that the goal is to collect all the body parts within one person. The catch is, once you've got the Valmar vacuumed out of you, it'll leave the original host a comatose husk. Millennia seemingly has no concern for this. In fact, outside of Ryudo and the immediate party, she's not outwardly worried about the consequences of her actions, so long as she continues to gain more parts. After quite a few detours of helping random strangers, our party finally meets the Pope Zera. We're given a new task. In order to save Elena, we need to find the Sword of Granas, the Granas Saber. Not the most original name, sure. Legend has it that this is the ancient weapon that defeated Valmar in the battle between good and evil. While Zera cannot remove the wings of Valmar from Elena's body, defeating Valmar and sealing away his power once more should do the trick. The Granas Saber seems to be the key to that power. We also get to catch the tail end of Zera's sermon. He's reassuring his clergy that the day of darkness is not upon us if we all remain strong in the face of evil. He's trying to give the people hope. Our journey takes us to our first stop, which is Roan's hometown, Syrum. There we can take a boat to follow up on rumors of the sword's location. It's worth noting at this point the relationship between Ryudo and Elena starts to become a little more apparent. There's the usual hijinks like, "Oh, are you two a couple?" And then they get all weird about it. You know, the usual. We're pitching right over the anime flirting plate here. The party is quick to discover that the kingdom of Syrum has a prince who has recently run away named Roan. Oh, right, well, found him, easy enough. Turns out we've been with a prince the whole time. Roan informs us that he was searching the world for the answer to why his people were called the People of Darkness. We discover his home city of Syrum fought on the side of darkness in ancient times. And even more shocking is their ancient sealed family crypt beneath the city is in fact a long since abandoned robot factory. Even more twisty and turny, it turns out Ryudo's brother Melphis arrived in town before us. He's been corrupting the mind of the king. Did they call the interns in for this one? And manipulating the king, he's gotten him to open up the once sealed automata factory where he releases the claws of Valmar onto one of the remaining functioning androids. We'll find out her name is Tio, and after we battle her, she goes back to her normal, boring android function, which seems to be waiting for a command. I guess removing a part of Valmar from a robot does not leave them comatose, just basically a factory reset. Merrick, the idealist that he is, tells her to live her best life. She does not like this command, because she's a robot, and starts following Merrick around like a puppy as a result. That factory's pretty sciencey looking. I guess that means there's an ancient advanced civilization? If they had a nearly endless source of energy obtained from dubious means to power their utopia, I'll eat my hat. And that's a terrible bet to make. We're playing a JRPG from the early 2000s. Joking aside, the more you play the game, the more you realize that this Valmar stuff sure looks pretty suspiciously technological. Tio offers the party little in the way of insight as she's been inside this factory her whole life, but the evidence is clear that not everything is as it seems in this game's world. We do walk away from all of this with a new party member though, Tio, and she's an interesting addition to the team. Tio is a robot and not at all a human. However, she's capable of experiencing human emotions. Her story largely focuses on her coming to terms with what it means to be a sentient being. It's fun to watch her character grow and adapt to the situation around her and begin to understand why humans feel the way they do toward one another, a lot of the time firsthand. In terms of combat, her character's a lot like Roan, but cranked up to 11. She's super fast, she can do group cancels, she is an amazing utility for your party. If you do her stats right, she can get 2 attacks in before an enemy even gets to go. And Tio is one of my favorite characters, which is just a shame that her voice actress was given the direction to sort of just keep it flat and robotic the whole time.
Please give me commands.
Unhappy with his plan to turn Tio into the Claw's failure, we battle Melphis, but he overpowers us quickly using the beloved JRPG classic, The Fight You're Forced to Lose. We discover that Melphis is actually under the thrall of Valmar's horns, and he challenges Ryudo to fight him once more in their hometown, and then follows up with what I might describe as a less than graceful looking exit.
Our hopes and dreams were cursed from the start. Let me show you. Yes, at that star-crossed place back home.
Roan apologizes for deceiving us, but he must stay behind. It seems that Melphis was able to take advantage of his father because his mental faculties have been slipping. Roan knows he must step up and lead his people, so Tio will join our quest in his stead. From child warrior to child king. This kid's got a lot on his plate. So, the year 2000 was a much different place for video game voice acting. It's currently 2023, and we now have people in fancy suits on beautiful stages, going up to win awards for their performance. This was not the case in the year 2000. Were I to guess, this was a great way to collect a paycheck and forget about it entirely. It probably didn't cross your mind that someone calling themselves Pretty Cody would mention your performance in a video deep dive over an hour long discussing a game you acted for's themes and design. This cast is a who's who of voice actors. We have Cam Clark as Ryudo, Jennifer Hale as Elena, and Jodie Benson as Millennia. And their performances are on par with the era. The catch is, though, they're all reading a fairly clunky script. The translation here is serviceable, it makes sense, the story flows, it just can be a little unnatural in places. Ryudo must have been a huge challenge to read for. He shifts from stuffy prose to guy down the street wildly, sometimes in the same sentence. So I won't spend too long harping on the relatively passable but not noteworthy performance from these very talented voice actors working on a low budget. What I would like to talk about for a moment is what I loved about this game's voice acting. It's the villains. The campiness for these line reads feels right out of a B-movie, and I mean that is the highest compliment possible. Between Melphis and this yet unnamed future villain, we get the kind of scenery chewing that I live for. The actors here are having so much fun, and you can just feel the joy of them overacting to their heart's content in the booth. It's the kind of thing I can't help but smile at. I think campy acting can be a bit of an acquired taste, but there's just some real moments that stand out to me. As not to spoil the rest of my synopsis, I'm going to include a particularly amazing line read from our future villain over this stock footage of a kitten.
That I know well. Yet to save this doomed world, we have no choice but to use the power of Valmar.
And while I get why some people wouldn't like it, I love it. So huge shout out to John Seigan and Richard Doyle for just making my day with their villainous performances. It's also worth noting that the HD collection on the Switch comes with Japanese dialogue as well. And while I didn't play with the Japanese audio because I don't speak the language and I can't really critically assess the voice acting as a result, it might be more to your tastes. Melphis said he'd confront us in Ryudo's hometown, so Roan uses his kingly connections to get us a boat. This boat happens to be called the 50-50, and if you're wondering why, that is its odds. Turns out the quickest way to reach Garland is also nearly suicidal. This can't be up to code. Somehow we survive the experience and arrive in Garland, a village of swordsmen. And wouldn't you know it, everyone there hates Ryudo, a lot. Melphis and Ryudo both grew up in Garland. Melphis, in fact, was the most promising swordsman in the village by far, and even betrothed to the mayor's daughter, until the day he opened up a Valmar seal and corrupted his mind with the power of the horns. Overcome with dark power, he killed his fiancée, several other swordsmen he was training with, and then splashed corruption all over the place. At the beginning, when Ryudo had a flashback seeing Elena, it was this event he was remembering. He was shunned and outcast for being the brother of the guy who killed so many people. So with a heavy heart, Ryudo left the town and spent the last several years working as a wandering geohound. Melphis is here as well, and ready to face Ryudo. Ryudo, realizing there's very little left of the brother he loved, determines to stop him. The two brothers meet at the old training grounds where they used to spar. and where so long ago Melphis took so many lives. I mean, you have your party, but you're gonna need some friends for this battle. This is one of the tougher bosses in the game, and the fight was challenging enough that I thought it was another automatically lose at first, but it is not. We have to fight him the whole way through. The battle rages on and concludes with you slicing off Melphis' horn. I thought that was part of his helmet, but by the looks of it, that thing was attached. Considering how other people looked when they got Valmar'd, it's an okay deal. With the horn removed from his body, Melphis briefly gains his consciousness in his dying moments. He apologizes to his brother and admits that even though the horns were controlling him the whole time, part of it was his own greed and desire for power that made him behave this way. In his dying breath, he tells us that he does know the location of the Grandia saber we seek. It's to the east. He also has a moment of closure with Ryudo, letting him know he loved him and that he's happy to have seen him one final time. Unfortunately, there's an unintended consequence. The horns of Valmar leave Melphis' corpse and enter Ryudo, likely not the final gift his brother had in mind. Ryudo is strong-willed and the horns don't grab control of him right away. His unconscious body is rushed back to town. However, despite looking asleep, he's actually in a battle for his soul with the horns of Valmar, and he might be losing. This makes Millennia's choice clear. Absorb the horns, leaving Ryudo as a shell of his former self, and get closer to her goal. However, when faced with the choice of doing this to someone she cares deeply about, she can't pull the trigger. So she teams up with Elena in order to enter his mind, bringing his consciousness forward in order to repress Valmar and leaving the horns dormant inside his body. This means Millennia can't complete her goal, and it rightfully further baffles Elena's worldview. If Millennia were pure evil, she'd have no reason to help anyone other than herself, but she put aside her own personal feelings in order to save someone she cared for. And that's not pure evil. Why, that's just kinda nice. The next morning, Ryudo comes to and speaks to the residents of his former town who have all now warmed up to him again, realizing that their distrust of him was shallow and uncalled for, and that perhaps Ryudo isn't such a bad guy and maybe going through some stuff because he had to kill his brother. It's a wishy-washy village. This signals a change in Ryudo, though. A lot of the cold exterior came from being hurt by the people in this town and most of all his brother. Growing close to people only to have them kick you aside when something goes wrong, or worse, kill everyone you know and then leave, seems like a pretty good reason to be outwardly cold and bristle up against people you meet. But all of that aside, Ryudo is now ready to become the hero of this game. This is the last hurdle in his personal growth, and going forward he's much more sincere about his feelings. Knowing the location of the Grandia saber, Ryudo and crew are prepared to make the final leg of their journey to find it. And conveniently close to this location is Merrick's hometown. We visit this hometown wherein some bonding and pleasant downtime with minigames can be had. This is nice because it's the last opportunity for levity before the story goes insane. Elena sings, we have a bonfire, a weird story about the cat people liking the way you smell after you've completed a task, but I'm going to leave that for your playthrough because that's a weird one to talk about, and even some romance where Ryudo admits he doesn't know how to choose between Millennia and Elena. Once we're done partying with all of Merrick's friends in the village, we're off to find the sword, which is behind an eternal whirlwind. Sure, that's one way to keep people out of the sword. With Tio's help, we discover that an automata factory, like the one she came from, is controlling this tornado. The factory's head AI labels her as a defect for having feelings, but with the help of her friends, Tio realizes her life is much better with the people she cares about, and we deactivate the barrier keeping us from the sword. And hey, it turns out this is a very big sword. Like 2 stories tall kinda big. It also happens that the Sword of Granas is a spaceship that looks like a sword and is impaling the body of Valmar. Actually, that's pretty cool. Even crazier than finding this, though, is perhaps, well, actually, you know, it might not be crazy if you've played a JRPG from this era. The church is evil. High Priestess Selene shows up and frees the body of Valmar by sacrificing a Templar to it, and it begins to come to life. The body is too large to be fought head-on, so we enter it with Millennia's help and kill it from the inside. It's a whole dungeon in there, and one of the cooler set pieces in the game. If you like the idea of poking around in a giant monstrosity's nervous system, then I have great news for you. Once we defeat the body and it is absorbed by Millennia, we take the Grandia saber to confront Pope Zera. Through Elena, we're given pretty good insight into how the Church of Granas operates. It has, for the most part, permeated most of the world we explore's culture. Granas' religion seems very loosely based on Catholicism in its structure, i.e. they have a pope. but I wouldn't call any part of the narrative in direct conversation with Catholicism itself. It's instead just used as a vehicle to explore the thematic dichotomy of good and evil, and the dogma on both sides in this world. The Church's approach to morality is absolute, an institution that preaches purity in both mind and body, without exception. To back this up, they have people like High Priestess Celine going around with a religious army of elite Templars. And she's the burn heretics first, ask questions later type. Valmar is nearly antithetical to this. He's the literal embodiment of the very sin people in the world are trying to steer clear from. Giving into the vices Valmar offers literally consumes a person's soul completely, leaving only darkness. So between Valmar and the whole body horror nightmare thing, and the Church and their whole burn the heretics thing, the world of Grandia 2 is one of extremes. Because of her upbringing in the Church, Elena still has a great deal of trust for Pope Zera, who's clearly up to some stuff at this point. But I think her history with her religion does a good job of setting a scenario where Elena is still torn about what to do, despite all the chaos happening around her. However, it would take some real mental gymnastics to believe the Pope is good once we find out what happens next. Our party arrives at St. Heim Papal State and it's turned into a bit of a nightmare frenzy. The city guard are slaying people on sight, all according to Celine's orders, but even more surprising, she just morphs into the heart of Valmar in a truly messed up scene. We fight our way through her and the guard to reach Zera, and it turns out everything has been going according to his plan. He wanted us to get the sword in order to set the body free, and he had implanted the heart into Priestess Celine, which means it's time for some villain monologuing. So Zera explains the history as he actually knows it. The things the Church isn't sharing with the people. Granus is dead, like completely dead. 1,000 years in the past when Valmar and Granus did battle, they really did clash and fight for the future of the planet. But rather than sealing Valmar and resting as the story went, Granus just died. People just kept on praying to him because that's what they knew. This becomes apparent to His Holiness Zera and causes a huge conflict of faith, which makes sense. Knowing there was only evil Valmar represented in the world, he chose to go for a different course. It was a matter of time before Valmar would return to the world and bring darkness upon them all, so he planned on finding and reassembling the pieces of Valmar himself. He laid the groundwork for people to find and use the seals, even going so far as to implant the heart into his High Priestess Celine. Now, with all the pieces gathered in Elena, Zera can use her as a tool to complete the final form of Valmar, with him taking the role of its consciousness. This would effectively turn him into the embodiment of the Dark Lord. He would become a god. This sure puts us in a pickle. In a JRPG no less.
Say the line, Bart!
Time to kill God. It's very clear at this point that he just wants to be a powerful god. I suspect the powerlessness he feels at knowing his god is dead is pushing him into being, well, I'm gonna be honest, a little bit rude. Zera grabs Elena and takes her to the moon, of course.
Look to the moon and witness the revival of Valmar!
As per usual, Valmar's moon glows ominously in the sky when Valmar-type things are afoot, and this is probably the most Valmar-y thing to happen yet. Once Zera reaches the moon, it begins the foretold Day of Darkness, and the smaller moon creates an eclipse. We follow suit using our new ship, the Granisaber, and things go poorly. Zera manages to absorb all the parts of Valmar by removing Millennia from Elena. Millennia, realizing she doesn't want to become Valmar because that would mean a world without Ryudo, sacrifices herself by splitting off from Elena to take Zera's attention while our party escapes to safety. By letting Ryudo escape with the horns, Valmar is actually unable to be completed. Zera, despite missing a single part, is still given a massive influx of power and begins the process of becoming something new and probably spooky. While he's doing this, we flee, but the power of Valmar is strong on the moon and endless waves of monsters pursue. When we finally reach the Granisaber, it lacks the energy to return us home. Merrig, in a heroic act, holds the enemies off while Tio manages to get the last dregs of power out of the Granisaber to take us back to Earth.
This must end. You're thinking with your heart. Understand? Hey, Granus, are you listening? This is my first and last prayer to you. If you have any power left, take them away. Away to safety!
our party manages to crash land the Granus saber on Earth thanks to Merrick's sacrifice. Meanwhile, Xeris, now a huge monster, returns to Earth and begins to wreak havoc on the countryside, his minions coming down with him. Zera is drawn to Ryudo. He can sense the horns. We escape the Siren where we meet up with Roan and enter yet another one of his family's secret basement factories. It's here that we'll be given the last bit of the story. I feel like this kid really needed to disclose all these secret family catacombs after the first one, but in his defense, this one seems to be unknown even to him. It turns out his mother's pendant is the key to open it. This facility is another huge, sprawling dungeon, but at the bottom, we meet Elmo, the keeper of knowledge since ancient times, and a robot just straight built into the wall. Why are we building her arms and legs if we're going to graft her into the wall? It turns out Zera missed out on some key facts before he made the call to become Valmar. He didn't have the complete story. Elmo does. Valmar and Granos were both real people, but they both started out as mortal humans. It's heavily implied here that both ascended to godhood through technology. Granos provided people with power in return for prayer, which he was able to make manifest. Oh, so there was an endless power source.
If they had a nearly endless source of energy obtained from dubious means to power their utopia, I'll eat my hat.
Oh man. Oh. Using thought, the people of this world could create matter, so people prospered, built ships that looked like swords, and all around lived in a bliss. However, this infinite resource came at a cost. Wanting for nothing, the people lost their ambitions and dreams and became emotionally devoid. They had to maintain constant prayer to Granos or else their society would collapse because they would lose all of their sources of power to which they had grown accustomed. However, some people were against this lifestyle as they saw it leading to stagnation and ruin in the long run. Valmar offered them the power to undo the will of Granos, but at a great cost, for his power used life force itself. Both factions ended up locked in war, building ships, robots like Tio, doing hive mind body horror stuff, and fighting to the bitter end. Eventually, Valmar dealt a fatal blow to Granos, but at the cost of his body, and the battle was over. All the technology that came from both sides was lost, as their respective new gods could no longer offer them their power. Elmo is very helpful, but throws out pseudoscience with reckless abandon. And she starts dumping even more info on you all at once. It's a lot to digest, but buckle up. Things start to get even more weird when she explains the true nature of Valmar. To keep it succinct, it turns out Valmar seals weren't actually seals. They were designed as stations to help attune a host to Valmar in the completion of his true form. These were called cores of Valmar. They weren't made to hold him in. They were designed so people could hook up to him and let him out. To editorialize a little bit, it seems like Valmar acts as more of a vessel than a single entity, sort of like a hive mind or a biomass. The core then takes your emotions and outward feelings and uses those to attune to you. This means that while many others took a grotesque form, if Ryudo were to approach a core and attune to Valmar without having any ugly or dark emotions, he might be able to actualize the horns externally. To quote Elmo, he would make them into a physical existence. This would be similar to how people actualize their thoughts in the Age of Granos. Everyone is worried about this plan because if Ryudo does have negative emotions while in this process, he could succumb to them and become a horrible monster. Seeing as there's a world-ending nightmare literally eating the countryside though, the choice is pretty obvious, so we roll the dice. Ryudo enters the core to struggle against Valmar, but before he leaves, he finally admits his feelings for Elena, and they share their first kiss. But it's a bittersweet kiss because he's heading off into the unknown. While he enters the core, the rest of the party goes back up to see Zera closing in slowly on their location. He can sense the horns and he needs them if he's going to wipe out humanity. People, rightfully, are panicking. Elena, knowing she has no god to turn to, rather than feel distraught, begins to sing. She summons the courage within herself, trying to bring comfort to those around her. The beauty of her song gives these people hope. Everyone begins to sing along, and the chorus of their voices swell up in a heavenly harmony with hers. This moment really sold me. I was having a lot of fun with the game up to this point, but this moment is the one that'll stick with me. I was touched by the strength of the kindness and beauty in the face of adversity, and it's through song, and that's really cliche, and I know, but it got me. Maybe it's because I'm a Macross fan. We'd come so far with these characters, and even as darkness is closing in on them, they can still share a moment of transcendent beauty and hope. And that's really powerful. Meanwhile, Ryudo, in his own mind, faces off against his negative feelings and the disembodied voice of Valmar. We go through some of the usual tricks villains use in these conversations, like, if killing is bad, then why did you do it earlier? Are you a hypocrite? To Ryudo's defense, he's pretty to the point, like, yeah, I did, but I need power. Power to protect the world and the ones I love. Valmar counters that with the classic, I guess you're not as good as you think. Clearly suffering from an extreme case of listening to a disembodied voice become pedantic, Ryudo's power starts to dwindle and his consciousness starts to fade. Valmar begins to absorb Ryudo's soul, and Ryudo begins to become a monstrosity. However, in the darkness, he hears a singular voice. It's Elena's song. She's the guiding light that helps him overcome his inner darkness. In a pillar of light, Ryudo shows up behind Elena. Tio, touched by their kindness toward one another, begins to feel she further understands what makes humanity special, our ability to connect our hearts in our times of adversity. It's super corny and it worked on me really well. Like I said, this whole part really tugged at my heartstrings even though I knew it was very corny. Now we have a super powerful sword with mystical technology powering it. All that's left is to defeat Valmar. However, he's huge, so we go with the kill him from the inside method that worked so well on the body. The sword allows us to enter him, and he is just enormous this time. The dungeon is long and winding, it's full of eggs and veins and carapaces. There's this door, that's better. You can bring the children back in. Once we enter his person, Zera panics and flies his entire body into space. So now we're inside of a dangerous dungeon, which is inside of a dangerous place with no atmosphere. It's a danger turducken. Finally battling through the dungeon, we're able to fight the core of Zera, and he's gotten interesting looking. Traditional anime style, we all reconfirm our convictions to friendship and humanity before we kick the heck out of him. Sensing his defeat, he retreats and summons Millennia to fight us. Since being consumed, she now belongs to Valmar. This fight is easy and ends with Elena actually realizing this is a cheap clone. She's come to know the real Millennia through their journey, and this thing's just a hollow husk. So where's the real Millennia if he can't summon her? Now, I know this is going to sound insane, but the real Millennia was inside Elena the whole time. Normally this would be a fake platitude or goof, but since Millennia is a part of Elena, and the wings exist within her, best I can tell, in the same way Ryudo was able to turn the horns into a physical sword, Elena manifests Millennia as Millennia? I don't know, it works though, and they're happily reunited with Ryudo, who is now back in the position of having to choose best girl again.
Woo! Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for! That's what it's all about!
I know I've spent a little time talking about Tio, but I want to take a quick moment here before the end to call her out. Her character growth was by far my favorite in the game. All the characters in the story, perhaps with the exception of Merrick, because you can't become amazing if you start amazing, change their worldviews as the story progresses. Since everyone is explaining the themes of the game to Tio specifically, she makes a great sounding board for realizing these things in a less subtext-heavy way than the rest of the party. Tio slowly goes from believing a person's heart is what makes their blood move through their body, to what makes them do illogical things, to finally understanding that it's a through line that can connect everyone to one another. She goes from directly aping Merrick to actively missing him and appreciating his sacrifice. This in turn allows her to become closer to the rest of the cast. She begins to understand the importance of letting people you care about know that they're important to you, while you still have the chance. And I'd say it's a pretty great arc. And it's all done in more of a subtle way than perhaps you'd imagine. And it's here she sees the perseverance of the human spirit as we defeat Zera. However, Zera interrupts the moment by feeling flabbergasted that we dare defy him and causes the dungeon to split apart as he flees further within himself, splitting the party. Monsters begin to appear seemingly from everywhere. Ryudo, Elena, and Millennia all set off to stop Zera, while Roan and Tio agree to hold off the swarm of monsters. At this point, we're given control of Ryudo's party and we have to refight all the parts of Valmar. A final boss rush before the final boss. But it's a straight line through them to Zera and to his final form. I wonder what sort of horrible monstrosity his true forms made him into. Oh, that's not so bad. It's just oh, God. Ugh. No. The fight, however, wasn't so bad. I think I was a little overpowered at this point, but hey, we saved the day. As the life leaves Zera's body, he explains that his insecurities led him to do this, and at the end, his evil was motivated by his own fears and self-doubt. Yeah, well, look, buddy, we all got fears and self-doubt. That's no excuse for consuming all life on a planet. As the parts of Valmar begin to die for good, the whole body that flew us into space begins to come apart as well, and we're left in the void. Tio and Roan are seen falling down together in an excellent scene where we get to see exactly how far Tio has come in discovering her own humanity, using presumably her robot powers to protect them as they enter the atmosphere. Which leaves us with Ryudo, Elena, and Millennia all together in space. They actually have a little bit of a philosophical debate about what people should do now that Valmar has been removed from the picture, and it's a small reminder of the differences between Elena and Millennia. Then, deciding it's time to get back, the girls sprout wings and fly back down to Earth with Ryudo. And look, I don't know how they do this. Millennia has had wings, okay, so we can wrap our head around that, but the angel wings on Elena? I don't know, I'm not going to sweat it. How are they breathing? Magic. Will they burn up in the atmosphere? Nope, because they are in the epilogue. Bam. Case closed. I'm filing this under P for plot rope, and I'm just going to mosey along. Peace has been brought to the world. Sorta. I mean, the thing that was going to destroy the world is definitely dead. The world needs to find purpose and move on, though. No amount of heroic single actions can help with that. It's going to take time and perseverance. It's a group effort. And in the spirit of that, the game treats you to a nice epilogue where Roan goes and visits everyone to see what they're up to, not too long after everything has started to return to normal. Tio has become a nurse in Roan's city. Millennia is a school teacher, which comes as a bit of a surprise even to her, but she's adjusting, and I think deep down she likes the kids. Elena is a traveling singer and finally getting to sing her own songs and not just church hymns. When Roan asks Elena and Millennia if they know where Ryudo is, they both respond with they know he's taking care of something and they're sure he'll return because they're connected from the event. So which girl did he pick in the end? And that's a good question. It almost gives the weird vibe he chose both? Is that a trope I don't know about? I swear I've run into this scenario twice in JRPGs and it feels more common now than I thought. A part of me believes, though, they might have just kept this vague so you could find your own answer, which is fine, but I would have liked a conclusive end to play a little bit better for my taste. But where is Ryudo? Well, he's actually burying the sword made from the Horn of Valmar, and he's using it as his brother's headstone. He decided to no longer live for himself, but for others. He's been on a journey to make sure he's in the right headspace to better the world. And now he's ready to help the world become a better place, and ready to make an earnest effort at being a good person. And that should do it for Grandia 2's story. So let's invite the spoiler-free folks back in. So hurry up and finish your cookies if you haven't already. If they see any crumbs on your delicate gamer lips, my reputation will be ruined. Overall, I really liked Grandia 2. Now, I said at the beginning I almost didn't play this game, and it makes a pretty bad first impression. Ryudo is absolutely, far and away, a jerk the whole first half of the game, and it's a tough pill to swallow. In order for Ryudo to fully just be a jerk, we, the audience, have to have a reason to sympathize with him if he's our hero. In the interest of keeping the story opaque when you first jump in, though, Grandia 2 misses that essential step. It becomes hard at the beginning to tell if people are rude to geohounds or if it's Ryudo's bias making him sound a little whiny and petty. Thankfully, they don't take too long to remedy it, but it is going to strike a bad chord with a lot of people, myself included. But a couple more moments maybe of Ryudo being empathetic or vulnerable at the beginning would have gone a long way. Not to say I need him saving puppies, but I do want to see that there are some people that he can be bearable with. In spite of pacing his personal growth rather poorly, the fact that he does have so much personal growth makes for a great narrative. The story as a whole is rather trite, even in the year it came out. But it works because the characters and the truly vital world building that Game Art's had. All the way until the credits roll, we see Ryudo growing and changing into a better person. The other characters also do a great job of growing up and maturing as the story goes on as well. Speaking of events unfolding, the game doesn't really deviate from the story's path except for one little bonus section in the end, and the bonus section in question is just a field from earlier in the game with super-powered enemies. The game lacks a lot of classics like having a world map. You just pull your cursor over the location you want to travel to. I know for a lot of folks, this level of linear adventure is a little bit of a deal breaker. The game isn't especially challenging either. It has a lot of save points where you can fully heal, and you can cheese that if you'd like. It's not too hard. The bosses have a lot of HP and take a lot of thought, but a lot of the common battles are just riff-raff. And while it's very easy to see the argument about why these take away, I think judging the game solely on that merit is missing what makes it so special. Grandia 2 got overshadowed by a lot of factors and ended up being a bit of a sleeper hit. It was out the year before Final Fantasy X, which blew it out of the water graphically. It also shared a console with perhaps one of my all-time favorites, Skies of Arcadia. But there's a reason people still bring it up today. This isn't just Grandia 1, but edgier, and I think anyone who makes that argument's being a little reductive. To say this game is flawless would be a huge overstatement, but I see why it's crystallized a place in so many people's hearts. The battle system is just clever in ways that I am shocked more games don't borrow from. The vibrant colors and locations feel fresh even today. And while the tone is darker, this somehow feels very much worthy of carrying on the first game's spirit. Grandia 2 simply asks you to join it on a journey about adventure, camaraderie, and most importantly, the human spirit. At the end of the day, Grandia 2 is more than the sum of its parts, and more importantly, a game I didn't imagine was going to speak to me in the way it did, but what I found was a really touching and fun adventure that I'm really glad I went on.